Hello friends, in this module entitled Presupposition 2, we'll extend the concept of presupposition that we discussed in the last module, Presupposition 1. If you remember, in the last module, we introduced the concept of presupposition. We discussed that presuppositions are background assumptions about the world or a certain state of affairs which are implicitly stated in an utterance. They involve propositions which deal with the already existing knowledge which is common to both the speaker and the hearer. We discussed the concept of semantic propositions in detail. In this module, we are going to discuss the concept of pragmatic presupposition, and we'll consider how this is more a pragmatic phenomenon than a semantic one. Let's now discuss the concept of pragmatic presuppositions in detail. Pragmatic presupposition takes into account all the contextual conditions which make an utterance appropriate in a context. The pragmatic theories of presupposition, for example, given by Stalnaker 1974, are based on two concepts, common ground and felicity conditions. Common ground deals with the mutual knowledge between the speaker and the hearer, which is required for the interpretation of the utterance. The felicity conditions obtain when every proposition signifying common ground is true in a set of possible contexts. In the introductory section of the last module, we talked about the importance of common ground between the interlocutors. See, for example, propositions 2 to 7. We also talked about the importance of factors which lend appropriateness to an utterance when we mention the alternative contexts in which B's reply as either to A or to B could render A's utterance 1 inappropriate. In this module, we will look further into presupposition as a pragmatic phenomenon which requires non-linguistic background assumptions to make a sentence felicitous or appropriate in a given context. We will see how it is not enough to understand presupposition solely from the standpoint of a semantic theory of presupposition, which associates a presupposition with the linguistic items only. Let us look at the following cases. First, a temporal clause. An oft-cited example in this is the use of the verb die with the adverbial clause of time before. Look at the following two sentences. 1. She died before she finished writing her novel. 2. She suffered from a lot of illnesses before she finished writing her novel. Whereas the sentence, she died before she finished writing her novel, presupposes that she didn't finish writing her novel. Sentence 33, whereas the sentence, she died before she finished writing her novel, presupposes that she didn't finish her novel. The sentence, she suffered from a lot of illnesses before she finished writing her novel, presupposes that she did. The presupposition in both of the above statements depend upon our knowledge of the world, which tells us that after one dies, it would not be appropriate to presuppose that the person did something. Another problem which arises in the case of temporal clause before is due to the presupposition that the embedded clause is always true. See structural presuppositions in module 4, for example. However, look at the following two utterances. 1. She ate the dinner before the guests arrived. 2. She apologized before she got angry. Here, the sentence, he ate the dinner before the guests arrived, presupposes that the guests arrived, and the sentence, he apologized before she got angry, presupposes that the person referred to as she didn't get angry. Take into consideration the co-texts and context. It is impossible for us to presuppose that she got angry. Therefore, the context here does not allow the normal pattern of interpretation. Let's talk about temporal when. The temporal when can be problematic and would require textual information in cases it is used in place of the lexical item if. Look at the sentences given below. 1. She reached the railway station when the train arrived. 2. When you get time, you should watch this movie. The lexical item when can assume either a conditional or a temporal meaning depending on the context. We know that the sentence, she reached the railway station when the train arrived, would support the presupposition that the train surely arrived. However, it would be inappropriate in the sentence, when you get time, you should watch this movie, to presuppose that the referent of you will necessarily get time. This is because in the sentence, she reached the railway station when the train arrived, when functions as a temporal clause, but in the sentence, when you get time, you should watch this movie, it functions as a conditional. Let's now talk about change of state verb. Another noteworthy case is the use of change of state verb keep. Look at the following utterance exemplified in Grundy 2000. Keep running. This directive can be used in two contexts. 1. Where a runner has stopped and the coach commands him to resume the action. 2. Where the coach shouts, keep running, in order to motivate the runner, or simply command him to continue the action of running. The first involves the presupposition that the runner had stopped before. However, the second involves the presupposition that the runner had been running continuously. Therefore, here, the knowledge of the context is important to identify the presupposition. Let's now talk about contrastive stress. Contrastive stress can trigger a presupposition which is pragmatic in nature. Citing Lakoff, Grundy 2000 points out that the utterance, John called Mary a Republican and then she insulted him, presupposes that it is an insult to be called a Republican. This presupposition is pragmatic in the sense that it is derived from the speaker's knowledge of the world and from interpreting the utterance phonetically when the meaning derived is independent of the meaning of the lexical items. Let's now move on to defeasibility. One of the features of presuppositions is that they are liable to be cancelled in certain contexts, either in the discourse context in which the utterance occurs, or in immediate linguistic context, that is, co-text. The feature by virtue of which presuppositions can be cancelled is called defeasibility. Earlier we saw how discourse context can influence the presuppositional readings of an utterance. We saw, for example, the potential of discourse context to go through this animation. What does the animation show? It shows a man and a woman in conversation. Man: let's have lunch. Woman: it's not 2 o'clock yet. And after some time, man: let's have lunch now. It's 2 o'clock now. Woman: I didn't say that I will have lunch with you after 2 o'clock. I said that it's not time for lunch. In this dialogue or in the animation above, as you saw, the man may have understood that the woman would have lunch with him after 2 o'clock on listening to her first contribution. However, in her second contribution, the woman cancels her first implicature. Therefore, it may be noticed that the implicature can be cancelled without making a complete nonsense what has been implied earlier. If the presuppositions of an utterance are taken to arise solely from its semantic meaning, they will not be defeasible, as they cannot be cancelled without giving rise to a contradiction. For example, the utterance Sarah is thinking about Mona presupposes that Sarah is thinking something. This presupposition cannot be cancelled or taken to mean that Sarah is not thinking something unless it challenges the truth conditions of the utterance. Now let's look at the utterance. Sarah is thinking about Mona, if at all she is thinking about something. The co-text in the above utterance causes the presupposition to be, as Horn 1972 would say, suspended. Now consider the following utterances. 1. Mary does not regret spending a huge amount on an expensive set of clothes. 2. Mary does not regret spending a huge amount on an expensive set of clothes because, in fact, she never bought it. While the utterance, Mary does not regret spending a huge amount on an expensive set of clothes, presupposes that Mary actually bought that set of clothes. The utterance, Mary does not regret spending a huge amount on an expensive set of clothes because in fact she never bought it, cancels that presupposition. Therefore, we can see how the standard understanding of semantic presupposition as the one that survives the negation is not only problematic but also simplistic. Let's now talk about projection problem. It was originally held that the set of presuppositions of a complex statement is a sum of presupposition of the parts of that statement. However, this was soon discovered to be problematic. In certain cases, the presupposition of a phrase or a simple sentence does not survive after that phrase or simple sentence becomes a part of a more complex sentence. This is called the problem of projection, wherein the presuppositions of some phrase or simple sentence do not get projected up to the more complex sentence after becoming a part of it. Kartinen, 1973, lists 3 types of expressions with different abilities to generate presuppositions in an utterance, namely holes, plugs, and filters. Holes allow the presupposition of constituent parts to project or pass up to the whole sentence. Examples of such expressions are factive verbs whose presupposition survives in negative, modal, factive, and disjunctive contexts. For example, the factive verb regret will presuppose in each of the following sentences that the referent of he killed the burglar. 1. He regrets having killed the burglar. 2. He doesn't regret having killed the burglar. 3. It may be that he regrets having killed the burglar. 4. If he regrets having killed the burglar, then he must not. 5. Either he regrets having killed the burglar or he doesn't. The second type of expression, that is plugs, fail to project or pass up the presupposition of constituent parts to the whole sentence. Examples of plugs involve the verbs of propositional attitude. For example, want, believe, imagine, dream. And the verbs of saying, for example, say, tell, mumble, retort, etc. For example, the following 2 sentences. 1. Sheetal believes that she is the best cartoonist in the world. 2. Mohan told his friends that Ramesh had returned from the US. Block their respective presuppositions. In the case of Sheetal believes that she is the best cartoonist in the world, believe is a non-factive verb, and at any point Sheetal may deny having believed that. In the sentence, Mohan told his friends that Ramesh had returned from the US, the verb told blocks the presupposition again as the information about Ramesh is given by a third person, Mohan, who might later claim that he never said anything about Ramesh, thereby making the presuppositions about Ramesh and the US false. Other cases in which the presuppositions fail to project are those in which presuppositions are either suspended or negated. Some linguistic contexts block some presuppositions and allow others to project. These are associated with the third kind of expression called filters. Conditionals such as if then function as filters. Take for example the following sentence. If I have a brother, then my brother lives in the US. The presupposition of the above sentence is blocked because its consequent contains a presupposition trigger, my brother, which presupposes that the referent of my has a brother. The triggered presupposition is explicitly stated in the antecedent of the conditional. Otherwise, it is allowed to project up to the entire conditional. For example, in the sentence, if you are going to the US, then meet my brother. The presupposition that the referent of my has a brother is projected up to the entire conditional. Therefore, we again see that the projection problem makes the understanding of presupposition as a totally semantic phenomenon flawed. We discussed earlier that common ground is a necessary condition for a meaningful conversation between interlocutors. For example, if the speaker utters the presupposition generating linguistic items such as my brother, then the hearer must ideally know the speaker has a brother. However, if the hearer is not aware of this, then he might assume that the speaker has a brother to be true even in the absence of explicit information. This is known as presupposition accommodation. A problem with the theory of presupposition accommodation is that not all presuppositions are equally accommodated. For example, the presupposition trigger 2. The sentence Vikas too arrived late triggers the presupposition that someone else also arrived late with no further information on who else arrived late. This makes the presupposed information vague. Semantic theory of presupposition cannot explain certain things. So friends, after this module, I am sure you are aware of how presupposition is more of a pragmatic phenomenon than a semantic one. Thank you.